Benjamin Castle are Americans. Watching the footy.
Liam Ryan saying, kick it my way, I want to jump over the pack, and here he comes! Ryan!
This is Buddy Franklin! This is the greatest showman!
Got the handball off to Myers. Myers looking for the lead of Stengel. Gee, they're good. Gee, they're sharp. Razzle dazzle Rioli.
Oh, who else? McDonald!
No,
around the body. Jazz up!
He's off from inside the centre square. Boys kick the goal. Boys kick the goal from inside the centre. Fuck! I can't believe it.
Good time of day and welcome to episode 242 of Americans Watching the Footy, where we're recapping round 13. I am Benjamin Castle, coming to you from San Diego, California.
I'm Ethan Castle, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh, that's different.
Yeah. So we were both in Columbus over the weekend. Cousin got married, and I'm still on the road. Started off in Indianapolis, was in South Bend. If you've heard of South Bend, it's because that's where Notre Dame is.
Well, almost.
Oh yeah, Notre Dame is technically, I think, not within city limits.
It's the same situation with Stanford University officially being in Stanford. It's Notre Dame, Indiana. But people say South Bend. Cool ballpark there, cooler gift shop.
Yes, the team store is a former synagogue. It's a building on the National Register of Historic Places, so like, all right, well, this building's here. We can't get rid of it. We got to do something with it. They came up with a pretty cool solution, I think.
So you've done Indiana already, and I know you're going to be finishing up in Indianapolis as well, flying back out of there. You're in Columbus, now Cleveland. What else is on this trip?
Pittsburgh, possibly Altoona, Toledo, Fort Wayne.
And I had to return quickly to San Diego because of my summer classes. Been busy with those. Got a little over a month to go for all of that. That it's potentially into full-time teaching right away. Very hopefully so. Just a lot of things to go through between now and then. I think this was a more interesting experience round 13 just because we were watching so much of it together that we don't do that much anymore.
I enjoyed the lack of overlaps. I enjoyed watching you watch things.
I think we really got a kick out of both of us watching us watch our respective favorite teams and not against each other. But it wasn't until the third game of the round that we were watching things together. In fact, the first game of the round was before I had started my travels. I was still in San Diego at that point, as the Western Bulldogs 8-11-59 were defeated by Hawthorn 12-9-81. Sam Mitchell continues to have Luke Beveridge's number. This is the fourth consecutive head-to-head win for Hawthorn. The first of those was that weird one late 2023 in Tasmania with Tim English taking the late kick-in for some reason. The others have been, I guess, more straightforward, and I felt some similarities between how this one played out and a good chunk of the elimination final from last year, though the difference was Hawthorn were on things from the jump rather than waiting to get into the game. Hell of a game out of Bobby Urchel. A lot of commentators saying it's perhaps the most complete game they'd seen out of him. How about 4 goals straight and 2 assists from just 11 touches? So 6 score involvements, and they were all as direct as they could be. He led things in the forward third, whereas it was more Jai Newcomb in the middle. And they really needed that in this game, firstly because they need Newcomb to be that guy without Day, but also with a down game from James Warple, Newcomb didn't make that matter, though.
I feel like we probably should have seen this coming from the Bulldogs. Post-buy struggles have been a thing for them. On one hand, they were kind of due for a stinker. Like, you look at their other losses this year, pretty much everyone was either they were shorthanded, facing a really good team, or had a tough trip. So for them to just lay an egg against a badly injured Hawthorn team that was also missing James Sicily and Nick Watson, like, of course, fitting.
And not just Sicily in the back, Jack Scrimshaw was also managed, and I found that very suspect. But for Hawthorn to win without Scrimshaw and Sicily, and Watson being hurt, and James Worpel being subpar and maybe hurt and subbed off, that's a statement there. Despite being -6 in clearances, Hawthorn were +15 in inside 50s, so post-stoppage pressure played a big role in limiting the Bulldogs' movement. And in terms of who stood up in defense, it was better intercepting games from all of Josh Battle, Blake Hardwick, who had a more permanent role in defense without Sicily there, and Josh Weddle going wherever he wanted, because just Josh Weddle.
He's ascended my list of favorite Hawthorn players this year. You know, I've always liked Newcomb, even with some of the stuff he does to get fined all the time. But Weddle, or Joe Webble, as Massimo D'Ambrosio's grandfather calls him, more and more enjoyable to watch every game as he's developed this level of comfort playing pretty much everywhere.
4 intercept marks and 6 rebound 50s is pretty good on its own. But then you also have the goal that he kicked, the willingness to take ground both by running and by kicking. If part of Hawthorn's solution to things is just let Josh Weddle be Josh Weddle, then that's already a good sign. And again, to pull out a win like this with the pieces that they were missing, I think it says a lot, even with the Bulldogs having post-buy struggles and struggles with Hawthorn.
One of the biggest pieces for what the Hawks were doing, especially once Worpel got subbed out, was Josh Ward, who's just like, obviously he's not quite on the level of Newcomb, Day, Nash, but he did a really good job stepping up in some of those absences to just help hold down the fort in the middle. And you also had 3 guys playing their first game of the year for Hawthorn between Sam Butler, Max Ramsden, Seamus Mitchell. 2 of those 3 immediately stepping in and having positive contributions. I think it says something about both how deep and talented this list is and how good this coaching staff is, as opposed to a week that just reinforced every negative perception you might have of the Luke Beveridge experience. First off, Oscar Baker's done well. You take him out from, I probably would have put him in the sub role again. They dropped Taylor DeRay, totally understandable.
Even if it was against his former team, and guys tend to rise against their old sides.
And they bring in Ryan Gardner.
And this is after Liam Jones had a game of the VFL before the bye.
What do they have against Liam Jones?
Looking back at the stats from that VFL game, yeah, he had 12 marks in their round 9 VFL game against Geelong. So there was nothing wrong with him at all. And yet they decided, now let's give him another game 2 weeks later in the reserves instead. I thought Liam Jones was supposed to be that deep option to allow Rory Lobb to be kind of more of a roaming intercept mark and one-on-one defender if he needed to be. He's done well at that, but just kind of a more flexible, tall defender in general. They tried to have Gardner man up instead, and boy, that didn't work.
Yeah, one of the biggest reasons Bobby Orchol had such a good game was taking advantage of that matchup. He was late on an attempt to spoil Chol before Chol kicked his 4th. He was the one that got left in the dust when Jack Ginnivan kicked the goal that pretty much sealed it. Then, of course, there's a ton of discourse about Ginnivan, showing the ball because A, it's Jack Ginnivan, and B, anyone does that, it becomes a whole thing. Shea Bolton showing the ball was a thing. Was that?
Well, he'd done it before. He did it once against Sam Doherty.
Yeah. So my thing is, make sure you back it up and know that it might get the opponents riled up and give them material for next time. And I think nobody understands that better than Jack Ginnivan. Like, he totally understands his role in this. But yeah, Gardner was not good. He should not have been the one in this role. This was both bad process and bad results.
Going back to your talk about the inclusions for Hawthorn, you also did mention Josh Ward in there. Ward is someone who had been on the fringe of selection for 2 years running, if not 3. And he's really held things down and helped to do that, I'll say, when Day has missed so much time and Nash as well. And I think it would be very tough to take him out once Will Day is healthy. 4 clearances and 5 tackles for Ward and 5 score involvements from 28, 7 intercepts as well. So playing well, going both ways from the midfield. That's a more rewarding part of watching Hawthorn. yes, definitely want to compliment Sam Butler as well because he had some positive early involvements. This was his first AFL action in well over a year after he had a really gruesome leg break, I believe, early last year. Involved in a couple goals in a row around the midpoint of the first quarter that helped Hawthorn get off to their really nice start because it was already a 4-goal game at quarter time and didn't really ever get much closer than that. Hawthorn had 10 of the first 12 inside 50s, 4 of the first 5 center clearances. 32 points was the most that the Bulldogs have given up in a first quarter this year. Hawthorn also totally reversed course from last weekend, put on a huge amount of pressure because the prior 2 weeks they'd had 36 and 38 tackles for the whole game, 35 in the first half alone. They flipped the switches that they needed to. Let's note that the Bulldogs are now 1-5 against the current top 9, with the only one of those being at GWS in Canberra, where they've had a good track record.
And it's not like they're facing a deficit in talent in these games. At worst, the Bulldogs have as much talent as every other team, if not more.
Again, if you're looking at like teams that you'd want to play as in AFL 25 with the list profile that the Dogs have, they'd be one of my first picks, along with probably the Brisbane Lions. And again, just the formula seeming so similar to prior meetings between these two teams. Hawthorn pushing up to meet the Bulldogs midfield with high pressure, denied all their handball outlets, and then failures in one-on-one matches in the back as well. One adjustment that I would have liked would have been for Riley West to do a bit more up the ground. I know Tom Hawkins mentioned this on the Fox Footy commentary too. We know West has been able to get on the end of plays and kick more goals these past couple of years, but I feel like some of his defensive forward work has been lost at the same time. I think as Hawthorn were getting those repeat entries and trying to do a lot from the outside, I would have liked for West to have more of a defensive role going on the half forward flank.
Lockie McNeil was subbed off with, it was listed as 3 disposals at the time. He got credit for a 4th somewhere in the aftermath. I get it, but there were, I would have taken Gardner off, or maybe Sam Davidson, who was hardly noticeable, or Luke Cleary, who did next to nothing, or Aaron Naughton.
I would have almost considered trying to throw Naughton back if you took out Gardner, see what he could have done to try and disrupt Joel.
Instead, they tried throwing Rory Lobb forward, and while Lobb himself did fine going forward, it continued to leave this void defensively, and it's like you're just trying to patch up one problem while creating another.
And I believe this is the appropriate time to say congratulations, Luke Beveridge, on your 2-year contract extension. What timing?
It's so painfully on brand.
I get why it's happening. It's not like you're going to get much better out of the current coaching pool, probably, but the timing feels so off.
I think that for the most part this year, Beveridge has done a better job, but then this game was like, it feels like just a reversion to what they already, what they've been.
They are who we thought they were.
I'd praise them about putting guys in the right positions more often than not. And then it comes to the selection table where they have their fuck-ups again. So this is going to be fun to dissect what changes and how many of them are made before what could be a tough Thursday test, the Saints and Marvel. And even though the Saints weren't playing this round, there were definitely some vibes to the round as a whole with very, very low scores in a lot of games. How's this for you? In a round of at least 7 games, round 13 had a high score of 81 points. That was Hawthorn in this round opener. That was the lowest high score of any round of 7 or more games if you ignore the compromised 2020 16-minute quarters. And that was without Ross Lyon being involved somehow. There's a lot of meme fodder there. Definitely weather was also a reason for some of that, as we definitely saw in the Friday game, which had as wet weather a feeling as any game I've seen in now 5.5 AFL seasons for almost 3 quarters.
Well, it was pregame where it really poured. It was Adelaide 10-8-68, defeating Brisbane 8-15-63.
Even with the rain being pregame, the effects were very obvious throughout. There was so much priority on the next contest rather than any greater possession chains. And again, at least up until the late third quarter, I say that was the case.
You feel like on paper, this is a matchup that should be a super high scoring game, right?
It's had its higher scoring games in the past. 2023 winning scores of 95 and 99. There was the 90-all draw last year, 97-86 at the GABA as well.
While I do really like Brisbane's defense, I found that kind of surprising. Where do you start with this one? Do we start at the start or do we start at the end?
I feel like we kind of need to talk about both because there's the hilarity, some kind of black comedy in how it all happened, with Brisbane getting all the early entries but not getting much reward for it. Adelaide getting even less reward, no goal 6, and 1 out on the full in the first quarter, after they had kicked 21-5 6 days prior in Sydney. Then, Brisbane finishing with 8 behinds and 2 out on the full in the fourth quarter. The expected score for this game had the Lions ahead by over 31. You can make the moral victory jokes as much as you want. It just feels demoralizing when you look at that stat. It got away from Brisbane. Is this one of the ones, Ethan, where you say Brisbane lost it more than Adelaide won it?
Yes, that is exactly what I was thinking.
Good. I agree. And it's weird because despite Brisbane always being front on the inside 50 count, they finished plus 13 for inside 50s. Adelaide consistently had the better looks at goal, the better entries, deeper entries a lot of the time.
Also helped that for the first about 10 minutes of the fourth quarter, Jordan Dawson did what Patrick Dangerfield did in that fourth quarter against Collingwood a month ago, except it wasn't for the full quarter like Dangerfield. It was really for about 10 minutes.
Dawson with another high-pressure game, 11 tackles for him to go along with 13 for Jake Saligo. And with Dawson and really no one for Adelaide being able to steadily impact clearances, because the Lions were plus 19 in clearances, that was how they needed to play it. And that kind of goes along with the wet weather aspects of this game, too.
Josh Dunkley was pretty darn good on Dawson for 3 quarters, and then Dawson finally got going in the fourth. Brisbane just, this feels like one that slipped away.
Feels like, no. Say it was one that slipped away. And Zach Bailey is going to be the scapegoat because of his 2 complete misses in the fourth quarter, but he's by no means alone. The one line who I'm thinking of who did like the most damaging things in the forward 50 was Cameron Rayner, and he even had a couple. He went 2-2 from 17. Even Brisbane's best players weren't immune. I mean, I guess Charlie Cameron had 2 goals straight. And yes, that was fun seeing Charlie get a couple against his old side. But he also wasn't really cited in the fourth quarter.
Aside from Dawson going off for those 10 minutes, Brisbane's defense was awfully good. Once again, a bunch of big late intercepts by Jack Payne, but because of the struggles at the other end, nobody will remember how important those plays were. It was a down game from Noah Answorth, who's had a really nice year. He had a bit of a stinker. That's bound to happen from time to time, especially with someone that, as good as Answorth's been, isn't really, like at the center of your main core. He's a solid supplemental piece.
He'd played above that supplemental grade for sure from middle of last year, though. So a bit of a regression from him is quite noticeable, especially when you're without Brandon Starcevich, who does look like he's on the verge of returning in some capacity. The last goal of this game, by the way, was scored with just under 9 minutes left. It was Ben Keys with his third. Really like the games of both 3-goal scorers for Adelaide, Ben Keys and Joshua Shelley. And it wasn't just that they were scoring themselves. I thought Keys did a really nice job as a whole, kind of keeping Dane Zorko out of things for, I'd say, at least a half over the course of the whole game. And he still got his moments at stoppages too, getting 3 clearances. Just a well-rounded game for one of the Crows' clear forward half leaders, and hey, against his former team. I didn't realize at first just what kind of exchange these 2 lists have had, because Keys was delisted by Brisbane, as was Mitchell Hinge.
I don't have a good transition from this, but I thought Rory Laird did a great job defensively, kind of in a roving halfback role. And that's a guy who, a couple years ago was like just the guy who racked up the fantasy points and was involved at ground level and on a lot of clearances, and this kind of faded, but this was the best game I've seen out of him in a different role.
been waiting for this from him. Now with the pieces that were added into that midfield mix, it felt kind of obvious to start phasing him out and testing him in other capacities, though they'll be without James Peatling again.
What does BANNED mean? Means you're fucking bad!
Really disappointed by Peatling doing this again. It's his second dangerous tackle suspension of the year. This one coming against Lachie Neale pretty early on. The fact that it's the second dangerous tackle suspension for him in this season alone irks me. And I almost wonder if there should be like a greater penalty in terms of like an additional fine or something attached to true repeat offenses like that. At the same time, though, Lachie Neale ended up not having an HIA after clearly, holding his head after the contact. So either Brisbane played up that head contact, and, you'd see Dane Zorko having held his head shortly after in a different one as well, or the spotters missed them. If players do play up the head contact, fuck it, send them off for the HIA anyway. That will disincentivize that behavior. I hope that wasn't the case, though. But Peatling, is part of the physical, but Peatling is definitely, one of the more tackle first, pressure first players that has helped Adelaide succeed. They had 3 holding the ball calls of the defensive 50 in the first 2 minutes. They ended up plus 25 for tackles. And I think that also just was appropriate for the conditions for this game too. And I'm glad you mentioned Laird, Ethan. I'm also going to credit Josh Worrell for having a big fourth quarter defensively. I'm not sure if he, goes under the radar sometimes, but he finished with 5 intercept marks for the game, and at least a couple of those were at some really key points in the fourth. And I'm also wanting to highlight Dan Curtin for continuing to do well in that wing marking role. It wasn't a remarkable game for him by any means, but I know Matthew Nixon Company had been struggling to find the right role for him, and it's so valuable to have a tall mark like that. We've seen his ability in the defensive 50, but he's doing more downfield work there as a mark 2. Curtin with 6 marks for the game, also 6 tackles. So everyone really bought into the pressure aspect of this game for Adelaide.
Speaking of pressure, with Darcy Gardner out with knee soreness, one of the solutions the Lions went with was putting Eric Hipwood into a bit more of a full field role, and I actually thought he did pretty well with it. So something to grow from there.
I don't think the Lions are going to treat this game as a complete anomaly because these accuracy issues aren't completely unique to this game. Even though they did kick 13-10 in that loss to Melbourne, more goals than behinds, they still left a couple easy ones on the board there. And I think there's a lot that they can learn for kind of fighting through that sort of heavy pressure. And I think you're going to see more of that coming this Saturday afternoon when they welcome the Giants in. Richmond, 4-12-36, defeated by the Sydney Swans, 11-14-80. This was the first game that Ethan and I watched together this round. And I was already pretty tired given we were starting to watch this at a later time than normal. I guess it was 11:20 p.m. on Friday night as opposed to 8:20. And the flow of the game didn't really help with that at all. This was the biggest stinker Richmond has had this year.
If you had told me at the start of the year that they would put up more performances like this, I would have said, yeah, that checks out. Like, I never thought they were going to be winless, but this was like you said, their worst performance of the year. Dion Prestia had an incredible first quarter and then was basically unheard from the rest of the way.
It wasn't like there was a huge effort to stop him either. I think the more depressing part is that Richmond started this game decently well outside of Prestia. I mean, they did have a 1-goal lead at 3/4 time, and then it just kind of stopped. No goals for over the middle quarters.
The disparity in talent was pretty blatant. Inside 50 count, I don't have it written down for the third quarter, but for the second, it was 21-6. And I think the third was something similar.
For the game, it ended up being 61-38 in the Swans' favor. I guess it's also kind of easy to get distracted when this game kind of wasn't much to talk about. The ball led to the Sydney forward 50 to start the second quarter, and really, that didn't change much. As the game went on, it just took a while for the Swans to actually make anything of it. Past the midpoint of the second quarter, though, there were some Heen man flashes.
Isaac Heaney had a few moments. Nick Blakey, I thought this might have been the best game he played all year, and he wasn't just doing it from the very back. He was kind of snaking around everywhere.
Blakey finished with 10 marks and 2 assists from 34, 916 meters gained, 6 score involvements and 7 intercepts. Obviously, more uncontested player, but that's not a knock on him at all because his running ability tends to be what matters, and it did again here.
Yeah, he gets a lot of uncontested possessions, not because of an aversion to contact, but because he's able to outrun people, and then he's usually open.
When it comes to the contested aspect of the game, Richmond set a really high pressure standard early, and I think that was where Prestia was able to capitalize, because when he's healthy, he's a really clear on-ball leader who can open up the game for his fellow midfielders. He definitely opened things up for Tim Taranto and Jacob Hopper last week and at the start of the game on Saturday as well, but then they just fell off. And I want to be able to understand how Richmond fell so flat so quickly, but I'm having a hard time doing that.
Just not a lot to give you from this game. Just Richmond was overmatched in almost everything outside of that first quarter from Prestia. And Sydney actually looked like a pretty quality team, and there were no shots of Dean Cox in the box, unintentional rhyme, looking like he regretted every decision he ever made.
A nice palate cleanser for the Swans ahead of their bye, although, I don't know, if I were involved with the club, I almost would have wanted to keep going right off that. But now I'm really looking forward to that middle Saturday game where they'll be at Port.
I guess with both of those teams' results out of this round, it's the sort of thing that kind of, you still don't love either team's chances of playing into September, but certainly a game that, you win that, you're starting to believe something.
Again, you might hear people start talking about early elimination final vibes, and I would get it for that. This is when it started getting really fun. Well, I'm not sure actually if fun is the correct operative word here, but definitely intense. So during the later stages of that Richmond and Sydney game, we got some disheartening news about Geelong's lineup. Bailey Smith was a late out, and we just didn't understand anything about the whole plan with Baz. Why did he play off the short week in Perth? Why did things happen this way?
To be fair, as dumb as it sounded, realizing that I guess he did come into that game clean and healthy, and it was just a play in the fourth quarter that didn't have anything to do with any prior condition that ended up holding him out of this one. I think this is probably one of those where, if it's a final, you're probably playing him.
But there was a whole lot of concern as to how Geelong would go up against a Matt Rowell, Noah Anderson, Tuke Miller midfield without him. The answer was quite well. Geelong 9-7-61, defeating the Gold Coast Suns 5-7-37. Not a pretty game, but one that Geelong had more control of throughout, and it's just nice to see the Suns get taken down a peg like this.
Despite once again getting on the umpire's good side, there was the only goal Ben King scored, one of the worst calls I've seen in a long time. A supposed hold on Sam DeConing, who really didn't even touch him.
And that's why Ben King now has the longest active goal streak in the AFL.
It's Ben.
Because Jeremy Cameron did not kick a goal in this game. Well done there, I guess, Mac Andrew, but ultimately, that didn't matter.
For the second year in a row, Tyson Stengel has a great game in wet conditions against a Queensland opponent. He kicks 4. How do you make up for Bailey Smith's absence, especially against that midfield? Well, more of Tom Atkins doing the same typical Tom Atkins things doesn't hurt. And then how about Max Holmes' 40 disposals?
That was the first 40 disposal game for the Cats in 3 years since one that Tom Stewart had. And they were continuously effective, actually, disposals that mattered.
10 clearances, 19 contested possessions, 6 score involvements, 5 intercepts. Considering the contested split and the conditions, happily takes 60% efficiency out of that.
I know Holmes deserves a lot of mention. I'm surprised that you mentioned him right after you talked about Atkins, though. I thought you were going to be talking more about the fresher side of things, where Geelong, yes, still without Bailey Smith, jumped on Gold Coast right away. I thought you were going to be talking more about Ted Closey. Was this the best game of his AFL career so far? I'd say definitely the most impactful of them. 8 tackles, 4 clearances, 15 disposals, holding his own in the absence of a really key midfield figure.
I mean, Mac Holmes kind of did a good chunk of that, but just like, yeah, put him more in the middle. Makes sense.
Holmes did have 5 tackles of his own, but I thought Closey just kind of had the more similar game to Atkins and was going to be in that same boat of tackle and pressure success. It's not like I'm slighting Holmes at all for what he did. Holmes was the best player in this game. But I was just looking more at what happened at the source, and I'm glad that Patrick Dangerfield got some midfield spells as well, because that was needed to support the cast there.
Another good game out of Brian. Won a one-on-one matchup with Daniel Rioli for pretty much the entire night. Like, the Suns needed to have Rioli streaking along the wings more, and he hardly ever got to. And some of that's on teammates not really taking advantage and going to him. And some of it's just Brian did a really good job on him. It was a good night for a lot of the smaller players. I mean, I already talked about Stengel. Brad Close bounced back after that surprisingly poor kicking performance in Perth a week earlier.
Yeah, a couple early fumbles, but played into the game really well. Ended up with a goal and an assist from 17 along with 5 tackles. More often than not, get the ball into his hands and good things happen. And I feel like this is the right time to talk about Ollie Dempsey popping up too, just with more fourth quarter moments.
Even before he started kicking huge goals in the fourth quarter like he did in this game, you just felt this sense of confidence every time he was involved in a key spot. And he did not have a very good first 3 quarters.
You still had a feeling, though. I think you mentioned Dempsey at 3-quarter time saying that you felt like he was going to do something, and he did, kicking the first goal of the fourth quarter. At that point, once it was out to a 22-point lead, I felt pretty comfortable about Geelong being able to close this out. I don't think there was any doubt after Ryan Myers had his second. Actually, you know what? Let me correct myself, because the Suns did have a quick response from Bailey Humphrey, who started to come alive late in the first quarter and had a steady impact. But then Tyson Stengel had the immediate response for his fourth. That actually was the last goal of the game, despite about half the quarter still remaining. But yeah, Dempsey had his moment. Defensively, Jack Henry held up well, and Lawson Humphreys, despite a couple notable bad moments, by and large held up as a kick and mark. Time for Jack Henry to get the respect he's due. Again, I don't think enough people who are not Geelong fans realize just how structurally important to this defensive unit he is.
Also, Tom Stewart probably playing his best game of the year was very welcome.
And he was cleared for the bump. Hell of a bump to Noah Anderson, shoulder to shoulder. I think there was reason to at least worry a bit because Anderson did come off for the HIA. Questions about duty of care, but correct call made. Thank goodness he was cleared.
This was also Jack Martin's first game of the season, and I was a little surprised by the role he was in charge of some of the halfback movement, and a couple of his kicks were a little scary, but pretty much everything ended up working out. I like him. I like his handball abilities. I like that a lot, and my guess is they could and probably would have thrown him forward if the situation called for it, whether that be based off of injuries or time and score type stuff, but ended up not being needed even with Shannon Neal coming out in the second quarter. It was an ankle thing for him. I would think it's just Ollie Henry gets back in. You know, officially he was managed this week. I don't know how much of that is true and how much of that was him being dropped, but I get the feeling he wouldn't have been managed had he been playing better. A couple other things I liked in this game. I was worried about Reece Stanley matching up with Jared Witts physically. Did a good job. And then what actually worked for the Suns, Sam Collins was intercepting everything early. The coaches really liked what Mac Andrew did on Jeremy Cameron. I thought Collins was the best of those defenders, but I guess one of the reasons we didn't notice Cameron all that much was because of Andrew, and Cameron had been on fire lately. And then there were some stretches in the middle quarters where the Suns had definitely started to get on top of the clearances and control a bunch of territory. And I really liked what Bailey Humphrey did at ground level once again. And this has just been a fun revelation for this team. It's just a loss like this makes you question just how high the Suns' ceiling is when they're on the road.
They are now 0-9 lifetime at Cardinia Park. I do want to mention, Matt Rowell and Noah Anderson did get their 10 clearances each, but it's not like that really ended up mattering as much. They were still -4 inside 50s. They were also less efficient inside 50 by a good amount. Just the fact that they weren't able to do more out of that immediate clearance success, especially stoppage clearance success, says something there to me. And again, just satisfying to see Geelong take care of business here, both for Ethan's sake as a Cats fan and for my sake as a Suns hater. Because, for example, as much as I like seeing Jed Walter get into form and really show his capability as a mark and a goal-kicking tall, I also don't want him to get away with fucking decapitation.
The game is officiated differently for the Suns right now. It's up there like almost as bad as Hawthorn. It's pretty funny that a lot of the bad calls came from Nathan Williamson, who, 2 weeks ago, Bulldogs fans thought he was the biggest Geelong fan ever.
When usually that's absolutely not the case. But no, the Suns are getting called differently, and the AFL is going to get their reward from that. The Suns are going to make finals. Heck, they'll probably end up top 6, I'll say, and get that home final the league desperately wants. And I would love for them to get humiliated in that.
See, it's like the actual football they play, I like most of their players. When you take the umpiring out of the equation, it's like,
I'm a huge fan of what Anderson has done this year in terms of leadership as captain, just his overall play. Tuke Miller's role forward of center has been this total revelation. You're talking about Humphrey, Mac Andrews, Sam Collins, so many pieces that we like here. And the sensible integration of those older pieces like Dan Rioli, but they absolutely get fucking coddled by the league. You gotta fucking hate them.
Clearly they're better on the road than they've ever been, but this was a chance for them to go out and show something in adverse conditions, and they really didn't.
Which is odd for a Queensland team, I'll say.
And it's not like, the weather snuck up on them. I mean, the forecast had been consistent all week.
My prevailing thought is just,
Benjamin, 78% of our listeners are between 18 and 35 years old, so they probably want to start a podcast like we did.
How did you know that number, Ethan?
Thanks to the analytics we have for Spotify for Podcasters.
Formerly known as Anchor, sorry Frio fans, Spotify for Podcasters has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer. No fancy software needed.
It's so easy you can edit it while drunk.
And Spotify for Podcasters doesn't just allow you to upload to Spotify, you can also distribute your podcast on platforms like Apple, Stitcher, and more, just like we do.
Best of all, it's completely free.
Not only is it free, you can even make money from listener support or ad revenue. Hint, hint.
Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to podcasters.spotify.com to get started today.
And welcome back to episode 242 of Americans Watching the Footy. Ethan Castle. I'm in Cleveland. I'm on Twitter at Castle Media.
I am Benjamin Castle, back in San Diego at BenjaminHK01. The executive producer, Brian Harambe, is listening in from South San Francisco. He is on Instagram at @catnamedbrian. And collectively, we are all on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube at Americans Footy.
I said last week, GWS at this point is kind of an enigma.
The inner machinations of my mind are an enigma.
You don't know what you're going to get from them week in and week out. And this week was a big turd.
Yeah, I don't think there's really a kinder way to put it there. GWS 7-8-50, defeated by Port Adelaide 9-12-66. It was cold to the point that Toby Green actually wore long sleeves for the first time in a while. Like, I can't recall another occasion aside from the snow game in Canberra in 2019 where he did that.
Outside of Sam Taylor and Jack Buckley, there was not a lot to go off here. I mean, I guess, Nick Mabin had a decent debut in the Rock, actually. I liked what he did.
Yeah, I was really excited to see how Riggs would have matched up here, and then he did his ankle and was out for 3 weeks. This was the first game this year in which Port Adelaide won the fourth quarter, which I guess tells you something in and of itself.
Wow. I'm just surprised that this wasn't talked about more, honestly. It feels like the sort of thing that, like it's talked about every week about, Carlton in second halves and the numbers there, that this wasn't even mentioned.
I hate saying this, if it were a Victorian team, it would be mentioned.
I think you're right. Oh, also, Toby got subbed out of this game because of a butt injury.
Yeah, got Alir's knee right to his glute. He's got to be careful at this point, Toby Green. He has someone like that again. They might need to put him in the iron butt.
Oh, man. It itches.
Also, this was a double Alir game. Two different spellings, but Alir, and Lacalir.
Could you technically call it a triple Alir game then?
Mentioned this probably before. It's funny that there's a guy whose name is literally spelled Leek, and he isn't even the one with the nickname Big Onion.
All right, Biggie Nuon.
Solid game from Port. I liked both Connor Rosie and Ollie Wines a lot. Ollie Wines is, he's never going to replicate his 2021. But he's had a few games this year where you've seen just like the effectiveness at stoppage and clearance, and where he's been a really productive player. I still think that Brownlow season was kind of an anomaly in a lot of senses, but you can see pieces of it at times right now.
As for Rosie, he had a hot start, obviously. So easy for him to run off and through stoppages. And I think Kane Farrell's return freed him up too. Farrell, obviously, much more of a natural defender, and his long kicking matters too. He got on the end of one, but Rosie was exactly the type of goal you expect a long kick, sort of defensive midfield type player for Port to get. One of those where it was just you gave him too much space. You're going to get burned. You got burned. But because Farrell was back in defense, Rosie was able to do more just from the back of the center square. And then in the second half, he also pushed into the midfield. So success all around for Rosie.
GWS, it's where do you even start with the negatives on this? They probably needed to get Toby Benford onto Rosie sooner, but they had him on Zach Butters. Fine.
For the first half, yes.
I don't think there was a coaching issue there as much as it was just a performance issue. I mean, they went scoreless for the entire third quarter. I thought, we've talked a lot about Josh Kelly's importance, and he did basically nothing in this game. And then the two Lockies, I love Champion Data, but you can't tell me Lockie Ash is a top 10 player. First off, I think Champion Data overvalues players in that sort of role sometimes, although I will say one that I've been critical of in past years that has that role and has done a great job this season is Bailey Dale. But 30 disposals for Ash, 10 turnovers, and it's not like most of these were contested possessions. Okay, actually he had 9 contested possessions, which is more than I would have thought of. But looking through second quarter, handballs right to Willie Rioli, then kicked right to Asava Radagalea, leading to Hugh Jackson's first career goal. Those sequences kind of exemplified the type of game he had.
Continuing the thing with the Lockie trend, Lockie Whitfield wasn't as bad as Lockie Ash, but had a couple real notable mistakes. He kicked one straight to Willem Drew, which led to a quick rebound and Christian Marias' first career goal. That made it a 7-point game, and GWS never got closer. Also, Whitfield got caught holding the ball before Joe Richards kicked the final goal of the game. He was in a different role also, Whitfield, more high half forward, and it took him a bit to figure that out, feel his way into the game. So I don't know what to think about that long term other than the sad inevitability of All-Australian Lockie Ash. The Giants did get 3 goals in the second quarter and they led at halftime, but they also had 18 inside 50s in the second term and didn't make enough of that. Then Port didn't make much of their front half time in the third quarter. They kicked 1 goal for, but hey, that was 10 more points than the Giants that quarter, so there's that. Defensively for Port, I mentioned Farrell. I also want to credit Miles Bergman, just again as a defensive leader, as Port manned up all over the old Bergman, had steady involvement there. And the man defense also helped prevent the Giants' transition. So is play just a really strong man look the way to stop the tsunami?
if you don't get lost and you prevent the overlaps, the problem with that is I think one mistake and you're screwed.
You got to have really high confidence in your kind of running defenders to do that then. And your, fullbacks set up too with Alir and Asava Radagale being in there too. And this being one of Radagale's better games, I'll say that.
As much of a chaos player as Asava can be, he's had some really nice games, especially as of late, and he continued that in this game.
And yes, you mentioned Hugh Jackson with his first goal. He was mostly involved in uncontested play. Would like to see him get into the middle more often, but between Jackson and Marias, who was the sub, good involvement when it mattered from the younger port pieces. And Willie Rioli helped get them off to a quick start, just quick thinking from the left pocket multiple times. Made me wonder if the Giants have, some problems with playing up against small forwards because they don't have many real small defenders. Either that or Connor Iden just should have been more direct in his role against Rioli. They did patch things up later, but that's something to watch for in the future. Just if the Giants have more struggles with small defenders, because we talk about them having a pretty tall defensive setup, and it's even more obvious when you got Leck in there too. Now I like Leck being in there. I like having a combination of him and Buckley and Taylor and Iden, but it could leave them exposed a bit on the small side.
Two final observations I have from this game. Number one, GWS had a couple of annoying orange signs in their cheer squad.
Hey, Port! Guess what? Behind!
And also the Tom Green fan club now has a sponsor.
Yeah, was that Green Door?
Yes, which is an intelligence and security consulting thing in Canberra, which makes sense for this.
Very appropriate. We're yet to have any reason to make a Tom Green Cup because he's only played for one team, but I don't know, maybe if Canberra Team 20 happens. Oh, that reminds me, Gold Coast and Geelong should sooner rather than later be playing for the Gary Ablett Jr. Cup, especially if Gold Coast stay relevant. And Gaz was there.
There was a great highlight of a goal that he had kicked for the Suns at Geelong years ago where he got a standing ovation out of it. It was a great play.
Oh, I know the one you're talking about. It was one where Geelong had already really secured victory. Round 10, 2013. That was a pretty special one. Did not win goal of the year because I think Buddy beat him out. And then on Sunday, hands were thrown. And so were lots and lots of Eagles behinds. Holy shit.
North Melbourne 9-8-62 defeated West Coast 6-16-52. This was both an amazing and terrible game at once.
It was a bad good watch.
The first half was a hard watch. I'll say that. And then the watchability definitely improved as the game went on.
It was 21-14 at the half. Yes, this is Australian football. Why do you ask? The Eagles had kicked 1-8 at that point. What did it take for them to kick their first goal? It was 12 shots and 34 inside 50 entries, I believe.
And it's not like the wind was that much of an issue.
No, it really wasn't. But none of the trends in this game surprised me that much, considering the Eagles entered third worst in accuracy in the AFL. I'd like that Andrew McQualter was emphasizing pressure from the get-go, but it doesn't matter if you can't turn that pressure into something on the scoreboard.
It's also no surprise that with no Jake Waterman and no Jamie Cripps, accuracy is going to be more of an issue.
Jack Williams did end up earning his keep. I hope he keeps getting AFL time. I just think it's going to be difficult once Waterman especially is back in there. I think he's got much more utility to his game than Bailey J, but I'm just not sure if other people see it as much. Other positives I'll say for the Eagles, Tyler Brockman always brings good energy. It might not be in tandem with execution, though. When Elijah Hewitt and Liam Ryan lifted, you saw it for much of the third quarter. The whole of the Eagles go with them. Another game that I can point to as evidence for Liam Ryan needing to be in the leadership team. He stays involved. He stays a willing participant. The whole team feeds off that sort of energy. And Jack Graham had a decent second half, but the highlight for the Eagles was their tall defense. Sandy Brock has just quietly been a really solid 1v1 defender, and I don't think a lot of non-Eagles fans have realized it, but he played his role again. But the main matchup was Nick Larkey against Harry Edwards, and I can't believe I'm saying this, Edwards easily won that matchup. The only Eagle who was good for all 4 quarters.
He deserved to win this game. You know, they don't even get the moral victory.
Yes, and I think that's hilarious because of the last goal for Jai Simpkin. The Eagles lost on expected score by 0.6 of a point. And yeah, it feels deserved. They get carved up on rebounds. It almost looks like they don't want to defensively run. It's a stamina problem, first and foremost, but it also seems like an attitude problem too. And you know North are capable of getting out quickly, especially when Kobe McKercher is moving the ball at different angles and looking really strong off half back. You know, we questioned McKercher staying in defense a lot last year, and then with Sheasel going back into the middle for this game, McKercher had a steady role at halfback, and yeah, he looked good there. Sheasel also lifted late, and through the middle, especially in corridor action, Jai Simpkin provided his normal run and got on the end of that last goal too.
I don't think the rebound issues are an effort thing. I think it's just a lack of ability, and maybe it's just something that they haven't quite covered yet. You know, between having so many young guys and a new coaching staff, it's like, you know, you're not going to be fixing problems overnight.
I think one of the things that's going to be fixed this week is the issue with substitution, because Bo Allen got fucked over and the team got fucked over as a result. Took until the final 5 minutes for Bo to get on when run and fresh legs were desperately needed before that. I think the right call was made in subbing off Archer Reed, but you could have also considered, I think, Tyrell Dewar there or even Oscar Allen.
You got to give Bo Allen a full game this week, right?
McCulture says it's almost guaranteed he won't be the sub this week. Now, I hope that means he doesn't go into the waffle, but there's no reason not to give Bo the full game. You have nothing to lose this season, except maybe the top 2 picks. I don't know. You know, if Oscar Allen does walk, that would probably be band 1 compensation. And yet I have this, you know, weird feeling about this next game for the Eagles too. Maybe it's because it's against Carlton and Carlton look eminently beatable in the second half. I just expect another really ugly second half, I'll say that. But the positives for North, as we said, start with McKercher and Simpkin, but it went a lot of different directions too. Luke Parker was one of the chief responders for North in their fourth quarter effort as well.
I think Parker kind of won the bookend quarters. Harry Sheasel's fourth quarter was great after being really quiet for 3 quarters. I loved how Jacob Constanti both started and finished this game, and while he wasn't perfect, I think you once again got to see some of Luke McDonald, just like making himself a certifiably decent player.
I'm going to continue with my total endorsement of Jacob Constanti for that pressure forward role he's playing. I also just want to see him really be able to give it back to the Swans in that round 19 rematch. Again, I would give a decent amount to see him and Callum Mills on the oval and see if Constanti will finish what he started by tearing his rotator cuff.
I don't know if he's an especially great player, but he definitely gives them some character.
You know, not a huge volume guy, but a pressure player and someone who can also benefit from other small to mid-sized forward threats being there, like Cam Zurhar, who has been steadier these past couple weeks. You know, I believe, you know, I'm surprised we didn't mention earlier, we call Ryan Gardner of the Bulldogs Tikka Masala. You came up with that, Ethan, because...
So basically, if you're unfamiliar, author Lemony Snicket explained once how Indian food is either really good or really bad with like no in between. And Ryan Gardner is one of those players.
And so Ethan came up with the nickname Tikka Masala for him. And we saw on the bad side this week. We also thought something similar, linking it back to North here, of Cam Zurhar. And so I believe we started calling him Biryani. And the Biryani Bowl, then, if you will, has been on these past few weeks. 2-1 from 10. He's actually scored a goal in every game, 24 for the year, has had 6 consecutive multi-goal games now. And if he's that sort of threat, then he's going to take the heat off that next guy in the smaller forward hierarchy, that probably being Constanti. I mean, could even help take some heat off Paul Curtis, who had 3 of his own. Curtis was one of the few players for North that lifted in the first half.
I mean, this was a really hard first half to watch. And the second half, not just because of the inaccuracy, but just the pace got better and everything. The second half became compelling. And I'm honestly disappointed that this is the only meeting these teams have this year, because they've almost all been really like entertaining and memorable games the last few years, even as both these teams have been bad. But more on Constanti, I just think neither of these teams, to me, have a lot of like personality to them. And Constanti, the more he's involved, I think the more personality it gives this North Melbourne team. Just having someone who's like in your face.
You know, you can watch North because of Larky, you can watch North because of Sheasel, but you need that sort of compelling attitude as well. And Constanti definitely does.
Just that. It's just you need more players to have opinions about.
Fair. By the way, looking back at the history of this matchup, I believe every single meeting since we started watching between North and West Coast has been decided by no more than 15 points. And this now makes 8 meetings. And yes, it is really unfortunate that they don't play again, because I would love to see the Eagles manage to get revenge. And also, I just hate the selling of games in the way North are doing it. That is against a Western opponent in Western Australia. Now, good atmosphere for this game. Great atmosphere, actually. 12,715 at Hands Oval. And I want to see this happen again. I wonder if they might switch it, though, to have Freo be the team playing in Bunbury instead of West Coast.
It looked like a suitable venue. You know, sometimes when you have a game at one of these alternate venues, like, it's clearly not up to the AFL standard. This one definitely was.
Well, I think the AFL has also been doing a much better job of kind of elevating those venues, like with the money they put into making things work in Mount Barker and in the Barossa.
Oh, no doubt. But like, just visually, this was good.
On to Sunday night, where Carlton 11-12-78 defeated Essendon 11-4-70. Yep, Gigach could break out his winning by behinds tweet again. The Blues only won one quarter at this game, and predictably it was the first, which they won 6-1, 40-7. There's an argument to be made that like Essendon had another sort of moral victory in this game, considering who they're still missing, especially defensively.
This was, in a lot of ways for Essendon, a repeat of the Brisbane game, but I think the vibes were less great just because the novelty had worn off. Like, credit to them for cutting it to, what was the closest they got? They got it down to a goal on a couple occasions. Yeah, after falling behind again, 40-7. But similar situation of just really bad first quarter, and they aren't able to overcome it.
And also, they had Zach Merritt going back to start the game. Now, I get moving him around to break tags, but if anything, you push him forward, right? Even with defensive injuries, you have enough movers out there. Andrew McGrath was in there. Archie Roberts and Xavier Dersma do well playing outside from the defensive 50, and this was a solid game from Dersma in his 100th. Just Merritt going back was not the right move.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Merritt go forward a bunch of times, and, you know, it would be one thing if you were just, like, shifting him between different roles after, like, every single goal, but that wasn't really what was being done here.
Bombers totally outdone all over in the first quarter. 10 intercept marks for Carlton, and then going back their way, a bunch of gaps in the defensive 50, making for easy chances for the likes of Charlie Curnow. Now, they did have, some other good hard workers in there. Jesse Motlop started well and stuck with the game, which was great to see because we are total Jesse Motlop believers in here. I remember he also went back after his first goal and had some great work using his body against Nick Martin for an intercept mark at full back. Like, of all guys to take that, Jesse Motlop? Fuck yeah.
Unsurprisingly, while Todd Goldstein's had some pretty good performances, this was a bad matchup for him, and Tom DeConing pretty thoroughly kicked his ass. Combine that with another really good Carlton defensive performance. Loving what Nick Haynes continues to do. Mitch McGovern, still so much better than he was at the start of the year. Jack Silvani, I used to think of him as this like high energy kind of chaos guy, and he's another one who's just improved radically.
And then you combine that with the true hawk ball in Hudson O'Keefe taking 5 contested marks on debut. Second ruck to Tom DeConing, who, he's Tom DeConing. He isn't going to need all that much help there, but yeah, the marking presence was great. No first game jitters for him at all.
Like, you could have made a case to give him Rising Star over Daniel Curtin, who was also very good.
And Finn O'Sullivan, who had a really good second half as well.
Speaking of debuts, Lamone Lual, first goal on his first kick. Welcome to the club. I say welcome as if I'm a member of that club. I mean, I'm not, but I am eligible considering I haven't had my first kick yet.
He also joins 3 of his fellow Essendon debutants this year in Isaac Kako, Tom Edwards, and Archer Day Wicks. Yeah, Essendon have already had 8 guys debut this year, and 4 of them are in the first kick, first goal club. And I'd followed Lual's story these past couple years after he was profiled with that little 2-part piece ahead of the 2023 draft. Awesome moment. His family being in the Guard of Honor is cool. I hope, the pregame guard, I hope more teams start doing that for their players who are debuting, because that's a great time to get the family involved. And then also just 34 with dreads for Essendon has to be feeling somewhat of a type of way. It's not 43, but it's close enough, especially for us two, having Anthony McDonald-Tipungwuti being the very first player we recognized. The similarities were there just enough for it. I'm not sure if he is going to get that many more games this year, if things are healthier for Essendon, but I want to keep following his journey. He seems like an exciting one.
I think he might have a chance to stay in next week. We'll see.
Well, if Mason Redman is coming back after the bye, then maybe he doesn't have as much time, but there's potential there with what they're lacking in defense right now.
There will be another opening this coming week because Sam Durham got a 2-game suspension, which they have accepted.
Yeah, that was for a high bump of Adam Chera, who was not immediately assessed. Why the fuck, Carlton? It doesn't matter that he was eventually cleared. You don't wait to assess after an incident.
And I'm honestly surprised that he was able to pass the test, considering like you look at his face in that immediate moment. I don't think there was a lot of brain activity.
And then he wasn't only able to pass that, but he also kicked a goal later and had a pretty solid game as a whole.
He was one of the best midfielders in this game. I think on a night where Patrick Cripps was largely held down by Will Setterfield, who I really liked. While Setterfield was largely holding Cripps down, Cripps not of a single third quarter disposal, you got good enough games out of Chera, Blake Acres, and Oliver Hollins to make up for it. And, the depth pieces made their impact for Carlton.
Never sub out Blake Acres, by the way. He can have those fourth quarter moments again. Brilliant goal for the Boundary to open the fourth quarter. And you credited Ollie Hollins. He can still improve in his actual disposals, but his running capacity really mattered, and it was a better game for him overall. You combine that with Sam Walsh getting clearances and generating speed, and you see why Carlton were able to get off to their start and hold things off just enough to get the win in the end. But there were still, a lot of pluses for Essendon despite the defeat. A lot of
hadn't done the exact same thing a week earlier, you'd feel a lot better about it.
Correct. At the same time, a lot of possessions on return for Darcy Parish. Nick Martin keeps looking good in the middle, the clear best for Essendon in my book.
This season, and really this last month or so of games, I have become so much more of a Nick Martin fan. I don't think people realize just how much skill he has beyond the actual disposal numbers. Sold candy on Jacob Wiedering for a goal to get it back to 12 with just under 7 minutes left. Had one sequence earlier in the game that was one of my absolute favorites. He's been good lately for one of these per week. So the prior goal before that one where he faked Wiedering out, he spoils Will White, soccers to himself, and then kicks a centering ball that ends up getting spoiled but goes for a goal anyway.
And that was Jade Gresham's goal. Just Martin's speed and aggression, now he's got this time through the middle, have led to the right sort of chaos for Essendon.
He has the sense to soccer a ball to himself. The amount of skill and instincts you need to have to do that is enormous, and he's one of the guys who can actually pull that off. he's become so much more exciting this year. It's pretty amazing. There were some pretty bad calls in this game. Once again, say this many times, the right team won, but there were a few direct examples that I'm going to pull up here.
I don't even think Kerno was, positively impacted by one of those that we noted, at least.
No, I think there might have been, but Nick Martin walking a ball through the behind post and getting called for it when it hasn't been called all year. Like, if that was a call that was made all the time, yeah, that probably should be called all the time. But you're going to enforce it all of a sudden and only in Carlton's favor. Kind of amazing.
I feel like we could continue this conversation with right team winning despite bullshit calls going into Monday. And I think I'm going to go there.
Go for it.
Yeah. Melbourne 10-11-71, defeated by Collingwood 11-6-72. Yes, Jake Melksham getting called for that block was fucking bullshit when he got pushed into the other player involved with that.
These guys, I think the umpires have probably been watching a lot of hockey lately and wanted to get into the spirit of it, because that's kind of how goalie interference works half the time. Goalie's teammate pushes opponent into goalie, opponent gets called for goalie interference.
And say what you want about the treatment of Nick Dacos, he was kind of getting held on to a lot, though, by Ed Langdon. And that was a fascinating matchup. It felt peculiar that Langdon was the choice, because Langdon does have that great running capacity, but I feel like that's not a guy you want to take away from the plan for Melbourne's movement, because he's just such a reliable piece there. You don't even have to think about him in selection every week. It's just yeah, Langdon's going to be there. He could probably stay on the ground the whole game if he needs to. He'll get his steady touches there and accelerate play. He couldn't accelerate play in this one because he was on Nick Dacos the whole time.
Who would you have had tagging instead?
And there's the dilemma, because Oliver isn't the right matchup for that either.
There were a couple other weird things in this game, like Caleb Windsor being the sub.
He did have, a couple good involvements there in the fourth. Colton Tolstruck proved why he should have been selected. There's that.
I know Josh Dacos was good. He got the perfect 10 on the coaches' votes and the Neil Danaher trophy, but
a perfectly deserving candidate, I'll say, too.
I think both are good candidates, but I think pretty clear anytime any sort of award or vote is between a midfielder and a non-midfielder, the midfielder's going to win unless it's something absolutely insane. Was it Jordan Ridley last year at Dreamtime?
That sounds right. Yes, Ridley. Josh Dacos with 34, 11 marks and an assist. 8 intercepts and 7 score involvements, so it's not like his touches didn't matter. They did. Just the volume will undeniably help someone win as well.
I'll take Jeremy Howe's 14 intercepts. He had 12 contested possessions and was at nearly 77% efficiency. Only 3 intercept marks. This game had a lot of intercept marks altogether, but he had 7 spoils and he was just incredible. It's one of the best games I've ever watched him play, and he's had some really good ones this year.
The old guys, once again, standing the fuck up for Collingwood, and that was reflected in the coaches' votes with Howe, Pendlebury, and Sidebottom deservedly getting some votes. Really solid game from Sidebottom again. A goal from 25 and 8 marks. Pendlebury with 10 marks and 29. And I think Collingwood, with those guys leading the way, had the better sort of situational play. For example, they did really well bleeding out the clock with uncontested play in the final few minutes as they managed to hold Melbourne off for the 1-point victory. And it's things like that, along with the lack of unforced errors in comparison to Melbourne, that makes me believe Collingwood were deserving of this win.
See, that sort of stuff was like a throwback to 2023 Collingwood. Being the more opportunistic team, playing the situation right, not beating themselves, that's exactly what Collingwood has been under Craig McRae.
And you can look back to the second quarter as well, whereas they're a team that likes to push the pace. They were slowing things down in comparison to the second quarter, countering both Melbourne's speed and kind of their own sloppiness. Meanwhile, the Demons themselves, a lot of the time was same old as well with their center clearance success, but not being able to make a lot of it. Those high entry kicks tended to not amount to as much. unless Jake Melksham or Bailey Fritsch got on the right end of things, and they did at times. Melksham, more around the halfway point of the game, did a pretty good job on Darcy Moore, and then switched over to Howe when the results were more mixed. And then Fritsch, some great moments in the fourth quarter, then undid that with a stupid decision to play on when he could have just gone back for what you'd expect for him to be a gimme of a set shot. And in a 1-point game, that's the type of thing you keep looking back toward. And that was before the late errors by Clayton Oliver, bombing it out on the full for Melbourne's last real chance. And then Max Gawn with the kick right to Will Hoskin-Elliott right at the end. By the way, we had a second false start of good old Collingwood forever this year.
Yeah. I didn't realize watching this that, Bobby Hill was paid that mark. I thought he had marked it after the siren, but apparently not. But this is a fun recurring thing now. I can't imagine it happens a third time, right?
If it is, it feels like it should be the grand final.
I mean, I would still love to have more of just, like the one at the GABA a couple years ago with the wrong song.
Yes. Mentioning the grand final, though, because we now know that it will be, once again, a 2:30 p.m. grand final. For American viewers, that's 12:30 a.m. Eastern, 9:30 p.m. Pacific, which is a good timing for watch parties.
I'm mixed on it because of my other commitments and things, but I get it.
High school football.
Couple of things about this game that stood out to me. The whole Collingwood defense, really good. Billy Frampton also rock solid.
Premiership player Billy Frampton.
Will Hoskin-Elliott is a weird sub choice to me. Also, he looked really weird with long sleeves. I think long sleeves for Collingwood just don't work.
Really? I liked him.
Maybe because it was, the white back on the jersey too.
I don't know. I dug it. And I think the clash was perfect for this game too, because Melbourne was the home team, which means it's probably going to suck next year. Collingwood's white should be their default. But yeah, talk about defensive success going both ways in this game, because Stephen May played nearly as well as Jeremy Howe for a decent amount of the game. He won a lot of contests for the front position. And Daniel Turner was a strong third tall defender too. That's become a pretty good role for him there. He did get beaten a couple times, but I think, in the fourth quarter, there were a couple key intercepts that he had that just kind of highlighted his impact. He's not on the Stephen May or Jake Lever level yet, but not a bad third option to have.
Do we talk about the Stephen May thing now?
I mean, I did just talk about May, so the timing feels right. I mean, confronting Max Gawn right on the siren, not in like a kind of any sort of consoling way, but like kind of
what Turner was doing.
Turner was trying to keep the peace in the end because it was more of like an interrogation from Stephen May.
I mean, Stephen May is, at best, I guess the nicest way to describe would be like abrasive and confrontational.
That is his LO.
I mean, we've seen that a lot of times out of him, but like going over right on the final siren for that, like the only way you could do that and not be a complete dick is if it was like, hey, next time let's run this play or something, which is also something that could totally wait.
That's how that feels like it would wait till like film the next day.
But if it's fresh in the moment, I'm fine with you bringing it up. It's just like there's got to be a better way to do this.
Got to highlight Kazi Pickett for his moments that he popped up as well. There was one goal that he totally didn't mean to kick, but it ended up working out. And then another where he totally did mean it, which was in between a couple players and just fit. Actually, no, that was the second. Never mind. One of them was redemption for a delay 50 as well. That led to a Nick Dacos goal. And it's a frustrating call, but it's a correct one. I'm going to bring up Kazi as well because reports indicate he's likely now to take a mega deal from Melbourne.
I've said the same thing about like recruiting in college football and basketball. Never underestimate the power of a shit ton of money.
This would be 12 and a half or so over 9 years. It seems crazy for me to like see deals that long, but that would be like probably through the majority of, if not the entire rest of his career, because he's a year younger than me, exactly a year younger. And for the sake of both Melbourne and also Freo, I guess, not getting what they want, I would want for this to happen for Kazi. Also, they found, different ways to use him. Other smalls have still had their impact. Melksham, as we mentioned, Cade Chandler on the younger side, active in good ways throughout.
At the same time, I still love the idea of Kazi and Shea Bolton on the same team. So if this doesn't happen and he does end up at Frio, I will enjoy that.
Ethan, did you get the feeling that this was going to be a close Collingwood win? Because I had that feeling throughout this whole week.
I mean, I thought Collingwood would win and it would probably be, I don't know, in the 70s at most. But I didn't really give much thought to the margin. I mean, I probably would have guessed like somewhere in the, 3-goal range most.
I had the feeling we were in for a nail biter, especially after not having had as many as of late. And just, I don't know, the big game vibes sometimes can't be denied. We had it in this one, and I'm glad we did. The weather definitely impacted things somewhat, along with Melbourne not having started the season as well, although their more recent form would have, I hoped, brought some fans back into things. I was correct, though, that the Collingwood-Hawthorn game from round 12 drew more than either the Sunday or Monday games in this one.
Like if you ask people about, all the like major landmark games on the calendar, Kingsworth, they'll get ranked towards the bottom, but it still is a pretty cool one.
Excellent work with Bake Freeze once again, and the honoring of Neil Danaher, which I think probably took a step up this year because he was named Australian of the Year.
There's that. There's also just like, as rivalries go, this one isn't as much of a rivalry, but it was still a really good atmosphere. It seemed like about a 50-50 crowd mix. Probably a bit more Collingwood, but not like overwhelming like I expected it to be. Just that the situation at the end of the game is just a little reminder of like why things have at times been kind of dysfunctional in Demonland.
With this game, I want to mention, yes, Max Gawn had that late error, but also he was keeping Melbourne in the game with those deep intercept marks that we keep seeing because it's just kind of what Max Gawn does. It was also hilarious seeing Cadell Evans be Max Gawn for the big freeze. I liked Max being there for that.
It is amazing how many beanies people buy every single year for this.
I feel like people take pride in having, at this point, all 11 of them, and I would too. It's so awesome seeing just that huge sea of light blue beanies there. And yeah, you don't see that sort of that camaraderie in that respect with other big rivalries. So maybe that's just why the atmosphere isn't quite the same. There's maybe a little intensity missing.
Oh no, I think there's still intensity and motivation. I think it's just a little bit less in your face type stuff.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. You don't have as serious big banter.
Xavier Lindsay finally had a down game. He got subbed out.
And again, I think it was okay to have Windsor in that sub role. I hope they don't keep Lindsay down or out long term because
he's really good. He just, young guys are going to have down games sometimes, and he was due for one.
Everyone's going to have one, honestly. But with that, I think we've had these game descriptions run their course, and that means we should be getting to the way we always end these episodes nowadays. It's awards time. Let's start with the AFL Run Awards, shall we?
Yeah, Mark of the Week. Last week it was Bobby Hill with his knee to Jarman Impey's back. This week we got James O'Donnell going back with the flight for an intercept mark against Jack Dinovan. We've got Jordan Dawson marking a Max Michaelaney kick to a pack. He got his knee into Riley Philthorpe's back, then kicked the go-ahead goal. And then we've got Jake Melksham over Brody Myachek's back. Benjamin, what do you have as the winner here and why?
See, I don't think any of these are all that spectacular. I wouldn't label any of these as Brownlow night contenders. I remember kind of sitting up in my seat at Newark Liberty Airport when I saw Jordan Dawson's mark, though. Just kind of a pack situation. You don't think of him as being that type of flyer. So I guess I'll give Dawson the nod, though Melksham makes a compelling case. Yeah, it was fun kind of being in different spots again for this round. I watched that Adelaide-Brisbane game during my layover. And yeah, Sunrise Footy, as I said, I can get behind.
So here's the thing.
We started out friends.
What makes this tough for me? In real time, I definitely liked the Dawson one the most. But going back and watching them again today, it was watching that one, I thought, I remember that looking cooler than it did. And then the Melksham one today looked way cooler than when I had initially seen it. So I'm kind of torn there. I guess I'll lean Dawson off of the real time, which looked cooler. But yeah, watching him again, giving me hesitation.
Your round 12 goal of the week was Nate Caddy kicking over his head. And as of now, you'd expect to see that on Brownlow night. I mean, we say it's up there with Brian Myers from round 1. Your round 13 nominees, Josh Rochelle nailed a really tough set shot from out of bounds. It was at just over a 60-degree angle on the right-hand side. Pretty impressive stuff. But set shots usually aren't the type of things that you look for goals of the week.
Oh.
And there were a couple
After the siren, or, like Jeremy Cameron with the barrel from a few years ago against Port, it's really hard to go with a set shot.
But the two other nominees, Dion Prestia had nobody covering him following a free kick that was pretty deep. And so he played on and sidestepped both Dane Rampy and Tom McCartan before finishing check side. And then Kazi Pickett had this goal for the lead where he picked up a ball on the run between Scott Pendlebury and Isaac Quainer and snapped a one bouncer. I imagine you're deciding between those two, Ethan, so what's your call?
I think I'll go Prestia.
I like Prestia for the less orthodox nature of it. You don't typically see a goal of the week nominee being generated from that.
Yeah, that's kind of my rationale here too.
I dig it.
Behind of the week, last week went to Jack Williams. He tried to do the same thing as Nate Caddy, but couldn't straighten it out. This week, it's Oscar Allen. He bounced a kick from the left pocket that Tristan Jerry managed to touch. That was confirmed on review. So second eagle in a row with the behind of the week. I mean, when you have 16 of them to choose from, that definitely helps your case.
Yipes. You enjoyed my frustration watching this game.
Yeah, I think there were 2 or 3 times you angrily slammed your laptop.
And I'm not usually that frustrated, just in such an eminently winnable game.
And it's funny because they did a lot of things in that game that you would, if you just take the set shots and accuracy out of it, the rest of the Oval, other than defending the rebounds, they did pretty well.
Alas.
There are things out of this game that you can feel optimistic about for sure.
The optimism feels pretty hollow when you have that sort of result. Assist of the week. I think it also hurts because you're not going to get another stab at them this year because the game was out west. Your round 12 assist of the week was Jade Gresham with that check side dribble across the face that set up Nate Caddy's goal of the week winner. And yes, Caddy did win that vote in our eyes and in just the larger public's eyes. 3 nominees for assist of the week for round 13. Your 2 runners-up, Brady Hoff had this total failed kick under pressure from Jacob Constanti, but then he instantly fixed his mistake by punching the ball to his right for Tyler Brockman to snap. And I love that sort of improvisation and quick thinking from Hoff, who's continuing to show his promise in the forward 2/3. And
this was such a high instinct play, and awareness needed to pull that off. Should be celebrated.
I've said all along, Hoff has those instincts. We see it on the wing, we see it as a small defender. Now we're seeing it in the middle. And Nate Caddy actually got a nominee. And Nate Caddy also was a nominee for this round after winning goal of the week last week because he ran onto Ben Hobbs' handball, not dead Ben, and he soccered this great setup right into Jade Gresham's arms, so returning the favor from the week prior. But the winner was Darcy Fogarty, and this is one of the best assists of the year. He slapped the ball backwards through his and Harris Andrews' legs to set up Ben Keys' dribbler goal. That's another just really high instinct play to get it not just through your legs, but through your opponents as well. And managing anything like that on Harris Andrews feels even more impactful.
Worst on round. Last week, by vote, it went to Dane Rampy over Josh Battle. This week, honorable mention to Lockie Ash, but the winner is easily Brian Gardner.
This was the bad side of Tikka Masala. We've had a lengthy discussion on that already.
You're going to be on the toilet for a while after that.
Main character, your round 12 winner was Callan Ward. Even with the ACL injury potentially ending his career, his 3/4 time speech inspired the Giants' comeback. He was also celebrated on the banner this week, which was great. Just unfortunately, the team couldn't play up to all that great of a standard. Your round 13 winner is Stephen May. He played quite well in that losing effort, but more notably went after Max Gawn after the siren. I was also considering the entire Dacos family because Peter went down the slide as Heath Ledger's Joker, Nick got the tag and all the attention, and Josh won the Neil Danaher trophy. But for an individual, I think Stephen May's the right call.
I mean, you could go in either direction here, but I think it's got to be May.
I don't feel bad about that at all. So that's round 13 in the books, but that's only 16 out of 18 teams being discussed. How are we going to remedy that, Ethan?
We're going to do progress reports, but since it was only 2 teams, we're going to need to throw in some other stuff too. So I'm thinking when we do our St. Kilda and Frio progress reports, maybe Sir Doug Nichols round jumper ratings for the year?
Yeah, we always do this around the same time of short buys, or fewer buys rather, and I think this is going to be the right time again. So look for that in the coming day or two. Until then, you know where to find us, reacting to everything at Americans Footy, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I'm at BenjaminHK01.
I'm at Castle Media. Brian Harambe's on Instagram at Cat Named Brian.
And you are, I don't exactly know because I'm not in your heads. Good time of day.